originally in Spanish. I am supposed to explain silicon and carbon, although it's not a big topic.
Well, the topics get developed based on the questions. I just heard that the DNA, I imagine, of humans was going to change to silicon as we ascend, but I didn't understand it clearly because you are carbon-based.
Yes, there was a lot of debate about it here and even a fight. But regardless of what others say, I see it clearly. I just can't type 50 million letters a minute like Yassi or Aneka. I do see a lot of truth in that statement that carbon turns to silicon as it ascends. However, it is a matter of points of attention, or from where you observe this process, or from where you observe or study the base or material that makes up DNA, carbon. So what I see is that the base of DNA is seen as carbon from the point of view of the one who studies it in its own density. So from Earth, the base is observed to be carbon, and from here, it is still seen as carbon. But if you were to look at the DNA base here from Earth, you would see it more towards silicon. So what I understand is that humans who explain or say that you will go from carbon to silicon with ascension are calculating and theorizing it as hypothesis that they push as truth, seeing only the aspect that silicon is basically complicated carbon, and that with silicon you can incorporate more light or energy, but they say light into the ascended body. That is what they say on Earth. What I do see as true is that as you ascend in existential densities, you expand in complexity. This was already explained by Swaruu of Erra, in genetics being the reflection of something more complicated above. Carbon would be like the reflection in a lower density of something more complicated in a higher density, silicon, the shadow, as explained by Swaruu of Erra. Carbon and silicon are in the same part of the periodic table of the elements, group 14. Carbon within that group has the number 6 atoms, and silicon has the atomic number 14 atoms. So silicon is basically twice as complex as carbon. So it is easy to take silicon as very complex carbon, as it would happen as one expands in density with increasing complexity. But another difference is that carbon is a non-metallic material, and silicon is a quasi-metallic material called a metalloid, because it has properties of both the metal group and the non-metal group of elements. Both crystallize at high pressure, but crystalline silicon is very brittle, while crystalline carbon is very hard and less brittle, a diamond. I see that those who say that the human body will become silicon as it ascends still think that there are existential densities, as if they were separate things, like different shoe boxes. You are either in one or the other, and it is not so. We have already explained that it is a gradient that depends on the perception and mental capacity and consciousness of the person observing. Explaining in my way their densities, they only exist in the mind of the one who observes them, and they only have as a limit the mental capacity, knowledge, understanding, and level of consciousness of each person. But you are not in one density and not in another. You only accumulate more perception and understanding as you learn and experience your expansion of consciousness. Using the example of a tape measure, it could be said as an example that an average person on Earth can only see up to measure 30. But everyone will be able to accumulate the ability to see beyond that. 31, 25, 44, whatever the measure is. So a person who is in what from Earth is perceived as 5D includes, let's say, the point of the tape measure 50, and the ability to understand and perceive everything below that, including the 30 of the average human. So a person who can only see up to 30 will not understand the person who can see 50. But the other way around, yes, as explained before. So, speaking of carbon and silicon, it is logical that as we ascend, we increase the complexity of the base material of DNA. And the known material on Earth that would correspond to one more complicated than carbon, and that still maintains DNA creation or sustaining capabilities, is silicon. That is correct. But that is as far as human understanding goes. We have also explained that the star races, like us, do not observe elements in a periodic table. It is not that the elements are wrong, nor that more are missing, nor that they do not exist. Yes, they exist. Only that this is only one way of classifying what humanity understands matter to be, with their mentality. And their mentality depends on their level of consciousness, which, using the example above, is only 30 on the hypothetical scale. From here, yes, we see those elements and use them with their understandable names assigned to the same: carbon, gold, hydrogen, and the others. But within each of those so-called elements, we see that there is a virtually infinite variety of variants of each of those elements as they are described on Earth. As an example, if we look at hydrogen, which is the simplest human element, and compare it to the next simplest one, helium, we do not see a direct jump, but rather there is a range of variants of hydrogen becoming progressively more towards helium, being that there is a smooth transition with a huge number of flavors of hydrogen becoming other flavors of helium towards hydrogen. Heliotized hydrogen and then hydrogenated helium through pure helium, and then helium sliding into lithium, the next one with atomic number 3, as lithitized helium until it becomes helitized lithium. Then it is pure lithium, which then becomes many variants of beryllium, atomic number 4, as in beryllized lithium, into lithiated beryllium, into pure beryllium, and so on. I mean that we observe an enormous amount, perhaps infinite, of possible variants based not on the number of atoms per molecule as it is classified on Earth, but on the exact energetic frequency of each atom composing a molecule of an element. So we do not observe elements as in a table with boxes, one apart from the other, as they also do with the densities on Earth. Only materials when they are obvious and of common or daily use, because already in use of understanding matter, we only see energy frequencies. That is why we do not catalog elements as they do there. Everything here is energy frequencies and their dynamic interaction between those frequencies and the final result of those interactions in the form of something material. We do not catalog matter as elements because we do not see matter. We only see energy. And with this approach, we understand and manipulate what you call matter much more efficiently, to the extent of artificially manifesting any matter of any kind or molecular composition at will. So, although the change from carbon to silicon as seen from Earth has some truth to it, it is again somewhat simplistic in its explanation, being that the base carbon that you know will be sliding with ascension towards becoming something that is more congruent with silicon than with carbon. But it will not be the silicon that you know there. It will be another proto-silicon not understood on Earth that is more compatible with supporting DNA and thus what is known as organic life. As for the DNA, what we can observe, and from the Toleka Medical Laboratory, here where I am, is a change in the DNA towards becoming more crystalline when we studied 3 samples from 3 different races: the human, the Taigetan, and the Swaroonian, being that the human has 23 chromosomes on 2 strands. The Taigetan has 24 chromosomes in 12 strands. And the Swaroonian has 24 chromosomes in 24 strands. The balance between strands and chromosomes indicates an evolving movement toward crystalline, which is a uniform and mathematically ordered molecular structure that lets in more light, becomes transparent. Humans, 23 chromosomes, 2 strands, opaque, because without numerical matrix balanced by the number 23, which is not even, and collides with the two strands, forming a more chaotic structure. Tigetans, 24 chromosomes, 12 strands. Opaque, but becoming clearer as it is already mathematically congruent. Svarunians, 24 chromosomes, 24 strands. 24 strands, forming more chromosomes, by their aggregate complexity 12 times more complex than the human strands, forming 48 chromosomes in a single crystalline mass. Studying this with human basis and criteria, using the periodic table of the elements, we find that Svarunian DNA is crystalline, congruent more with silicon than with carbon. I did not want to give this topic because it pushes a notion of clear genetic superiority of the Svarunian race over the others, and it is not a question of superiorities. I do not wish to disempower anyone, but our DNA is already crystalline. Being crystalline, this explains why energy flows differently in Svarunians, as if it were superconducting DNA or cells, which in physics explains why Svarunians have the ability to alter their own physical state, what a non-Svarunian observer will perceive as teleportation, temporal fragmentation at will, dematerialization and rematerialization, how to pass through walls, and superspeed by temporal fragmentation, among other things.
Great. Thank you very much. It's understood. The thing is that at first, I was confused because there are those regressive beings from the movie Alien that are silicon-based.
Yes, it's a variant of silicon that is not understood yet. Because even using the human criteria for classifying elements, humans still don't know all the elements that can be there. Depending on what criteria, the periodic table could be infinite. It's just one more example of how the human mentality wants to reduce everything to manageable bits and pieces by their intellect, all catalogued as if they were file cabinets.
Yes, I understand. So this being would be a variant of silicon.
Yes, and we enter here another problem. Just because a being is of silicon does not necessarily mean that it is of pure love. Because although there is the transition from carbon to silicon with an ascension, and with it greater mind and consciousness, there is also another way of formation of beings that use silicon as a base, without having much consciousness. This is important. And as I explained above, there are many variants of silicon. And those beings, and those that are like him, could only have as a base a non-crystalline, chaotic silicon. Because what that being is interested in is not light and higher consciousness, but using other properties of silicon, such as its metallic capabilities. What interests this being and his evolution, for lack of a better word, is the resistance of materials, not the ability to be crystalline.
Thank you, that is well understood. So now on Earth, Do you know of any being with that silicon DNA?
There must be, at least in part. Maybe some deep sea beings or mollusks. I really don't know. But I do want to make it clear that although the DNA does turn more towards the crystalline, towards silicon, there are other reasons for that, being that there are many kinds of silicon. And that lurker is not very advanced in consciousness, although it uses as a base a silicon, but not the same one as that of beings of more light, who have another mentality.
And also, it's just that when we talked about silicon a while back, it reminded us a little of transhumanism. But as you say, there are many kinds of silicon.
Yes, again, it depends on the point of view and the mentality of the person who observes the problem and studies it. Because with transhumanism in mind, yes, you can interpret it that human DNA is becoming more silicon or will become silicon as a direct indication of the amalgamation of human biology with computerized biology, with transhumanism agenda that connects even with the vaccines.